Okay, I hit it on my end.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Addicted to Recovery, the interactive memoir. Today, I have with me Brianne Davis. She's someone I met I just had such an extraordinary time connecting with. And considering where I'm coming to in the memoir, talking about my own experiences with intimacy and sex addiction, I thought she was a perfect person to have on to talk about this. She's the author of Secret Life. The Secret Life Diary of a Hollywood Sex and Love Addict. Did I get that right?
No, it's
Oh
okay. It's
my
the longest
God.
title ever. Don't It's Secret Life of a Hollywood Sex and Love Addict.
Okay, I got the diary part wrong. Yes, which I just finished reading last week, which is such an amazing page turner and such an amazing tool for, I think, particularly women in recovery who just wouldn't even know where to start, really walking through kind of the process of recovery,
Yeah.
which I thought was really valuable. She's also the host of the Secret Life podcast, in which people can, we take it for granted sometimes in recovery that we have the opportunity to unburden ourselves and to share those deep dark parts of ourselves. And Brianne gives people the opportunity to come in and do that. And yeah, you're doing a great service to people in
Thank you.
recovery.
Yeah, I love that you said that though. I have to add, like, we do take it for granted in the 12-step world that
Mm,
we can go on a meeting, go to a meeting and say, here's everything I'm feeling. Here's the crap I just did. Here's what happened to me, and not be judged. And normies, don't get that opportunity. And definitely with Secret Life, I wanted to give people that opportunity to let go of their secrets, their shame, because we're all the same. We all feel inadequate at times, not lovable, like we're going to get rejected, scared of intimacy, all that stuff. So, yeah, I love that you pointed that out.
yeah, especially over COVID, I noticed how so many people who didn't have that outlet had nowhere to bring their sense of anxiety and fear. And whereas I could just pop into a Zoom room and talk about my feelings any day of the
Yeah.
week, any time of the
Yeah.
day.
Exactly. For even 10 minutes. If you could get on a meeting for 10 minutes and get to share or hear somebody share and go, oh my God, I'm not alone. And we
Mm.
take that for granted. And especially in sex and love addiction, I talk about things so easily now after 12 years of recovery.
Hmm.
And my husband, who has 33 years in AA, sometimes have
Wow.
to remind me, he's like, people are not used to talking about sex like this or love
Hmm.
like this. Like, you have to understand it's a very stigma, especially as a woman, subject matter. So people don't want to get it sometimes. They want to
Yeah.
just think horrible things of you instead.
Yeah, it's touchy.
Hmm.
And addiction and emotions, actually just talking about emotions can be a touchy thing.
Yeah.
And we're almost conditioned to be okay with talking about the deep things. I can get into a room with someone in recovery and we're immediately talking about the hard things.
Yeah. Like the worst of the worst, almost like laughing about it. Sometimes you're
Mm.
like crying and then you're laughing and then you're finding the humor of it. And it's like, oh God, I went through that too.
Hmm. So I read your book, which I'm
Yay.
sorry I botched the title of because I'm a little bit nervous, this being
Don't
my
be.
first interview. And one device that you use in it that I absolutely loved was using the device of a film script where you're
Mhm.
picturing yourself in a role in a dramatized scene.
Yeah.
And what a huge role I think fantasy plays in addiction and in addiction in general, but particularly in sex and love addiction, where we see ourselves as the main character in these elaborate fantasy scenes. And
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the huge thing for sex and love addicts. We are fantasy driven, we are intrigue driven, we are romance addicts, all those things where we think this situation, this person worth. And really, I would find myself at a very young age acting out characters in my head, and that's probably why I became an actor for the
Hmm.
last 25 years. My therapist told me, which I wrote in the book, Dr. Kath, like, she literally said, you picked the worst career for your addiction because you live and you work in fantasy. But
Yeah.
everybody goes into fantasy, and especially a fantasy addict, it's like, I wanted to take the audience in the mind of an addict and what that looked like and where your mind went to, visualizing your funeral, what they people would say, and how, like, loved you were and all that
Mm.
crap. That's just ridiculous. But yeah, it was a big thing for me to write the book like a movie kind of and a TV series so it could entertain you but educate you about the addiction in a fun way.
Yeah, I thought it was more than fun. I thought it was so immersive because it
Mm.
dramatized in a way what my brain does.
Mhm.
Similarly to in the movie Chicago, how whenever Roxy Hart, she imagines
Yeah.
herself on stage in a musical, and I would be creating all these drama with these men in my life, and I would be wondering why they weren't breaking into song because that's like because that was the way the whole thing was playing out in my head.
Right?
Um,
But isn't that a thing that all addicts say is before we even have the conversation, we've had the conversation in our mind like a
mhm.
thousand times with that person. And that's why I wanted it to be, going back and looking at the year of our first recovery for my main character, Roxanne, who is AKA me, but to go back and get in the mind of an addict when we say, or we're obsessing about something or somebody and say we're not going to do something, then we end up doing it. And that was the whole goal. I want the audience to read it and say, oh my God, I've had those thoughts. I've done those things. That has happened to me. I said yes when I meant no, all that stuff. And so anybody can read it and not be an addict and go, oh my God, me too.
Yeah, or not have the same biographical details as you do,
Mhm.
because I was reading it and thinking, "Oh, me too. Oh, me too. Oh, me too." And I'm not a professional actress. I was a expelled theater student. Close enough. Um,
That's pretty close to an
Pretty
actor.
close, pretty close. But I resonated so much with the dysfunction in relationships, the way
Mhm.
that, you know, people become instruments to us, like things that we use, as
Yeah.
opposed to, and even the way those fantasies play out is that we're having a relationship with ourselves, and that person just kind of happens to be there, and we get mad if they're not saying their lines.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. We, especially as sex and love addicts, we snort and drink people, and
Mm-hmm.
we want you to play this character in the play we've already created. And
Mm-hmm.
if you don't mirror to us what we are expecting you to mirror, then we have resentments. And one of the main characteristics is having ma- assigning magical qualities to somebody, idealizing and pursuing them, and then blaming them for not living up to our fantasies and expectations. Like that is the characteristic that I have like lived my whole life. And Roxanne in my book lives her
Mm.
whole life.
Yeah, and I really felt that resonated with me so deeply because
Oh,
I would say my primary addiction before I started drinking was having these types of fantasy relationships in my head that it would
yeah.
be all that I could think of. And then the alcohol kind of became intertwined as a way of trying to enact that,
Mm-hmm.
of almost trying to be a catalyst to making these dramatic scenes play out because I don't know, alcohol is a good lubricant. But whenever I would get into an actual human relationship, I would be like, well, these aren't the feelings that I was feeling when I was having a relationship alone in my head. And
Yeah.
be very
Never.
confused.
Yes. Or they happen and then they fade so fast. Or
Mhm.
you then get to know the person. That was a thing for me. I would assign magical qualities and I would assign them to myself as well. I mean,
Mm.
I would make myself look like the most perfect partner and they would be like, "Oh, you're so perfect." And I would literally say, "No, I'm a horrible person." Like, and then they wouldn't believe me. And then when I did something bad or broke up with them or cheated on them, then I would justify it by saying, "I told you
I
I wasn't
told
a good
you.
person. You
Mm.
didn't listen. I told you." And it's like, no, you're just being a bad person right now.
Yeah, yeah. And using that kind of I warned you as a
Hmm.
rationalization, but meanwhile
Yep.
performing this kind of perfection and knowing that you're going to undermine it and just seeing how far you can kind of, you know.
Well, I would want to stay that perfect, but I
Mm.
was playing a role myself because I was
Mm.
so empty and incomplete inside that I would kept thinking if I just keep acting like this or performing or putting on a different mask or being this what I know this person wants me to be, but I could never live up to it. So I
Mm.
also did it. I self-sabotaged myself because me myself wasn't good enough ever.
Yeah. Yeah, which makes me think of how, in many ways, sort of ironically, I feel that sex and love addiction is a manifestation of a deep-seated fear of real intimacy.
Oh,
You
100%.
don't want to show up as the real you, and you can't accept another person showing up as a real human. Like you're trying to manipulate and control these contrived situations. But
Exactly.
mm,
Yeah. Well, that's thing that's underneath the chemical addiction. Then it's like the people addiction that most addicts have. I mean, let's be honest. The number one thing people lose their recovery, and we've talked about this before, is relationships. They
mhm.
go to any rehab facility and they'll tell you that.
That's where I
But
met
it's
my boyfriend.
yeah, that's where they usually the downfall of
Mm.
it. Like
Oh yeah.
that relationship then triggers you to then start going back to that chemical addiction. So it's like, let's get to the root of the root. And it's like relationships, and then it's relationship with self.
Yeah.
So that is what sex and love addiction is about. It's not just relationships with others and God, it's relationship with yourself, because I forever have gone around not wanting to be me because I'm scared of intimacy.
Mhm.
Intimacy actually makes me sick to my stomach. When someone loves me, it physically hurts me. Like it's too much. I'm sensitive. I get overwhelmed and I don't know how to handle it because I didn't do the inner work to have intimacy with myself.
Yeah, because then it's like, well, what if they really see me and I'm not
Hmm.
enough?
Yeah.
And that's such a
Well,
crippling
here's the
fear.
thing, when I see me, I'm not enough.
Yeah.
So until I did that work with this 12 years of recovery, I never felt enough. You could love me through your face turned blue, but if I never loved me, so how could I even trust your love for me?
Yeah. And a useful kind of visual I think of is punching a hole into a bucket and then pouring water into it. Like you can keep filling it, but it's just
Yeah.
draining out because there's nothing to hold it. There's no
Yeah.
central foundation to hold what you're throwing at it. So for me, it could be relationships or an eating disorder or alcohol. I could just keep throwing things into the bucket, but it would just whoosh.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the eatings too. I was very anorexic for 2 years in high
Oh my
school.
goodness. Yeah.
Parents, breaking up, doing all that. And book 2 definitely goes into some of that. With the book, it goes back and forth. But it will hit on the eating aspect because a
Mm.
lot of sex and love addicts have the eating tied to it. It's a way
Yeah.
for insides are so diminished and out of control.
Yeah, I agree. And in alcohol recovery too, I
Mhm.
see such a cross section of women who also have eating struggles and also have relationship struggles.
Yep.
And I still feel like in so many ways they all come down to intimacy because for
Mhm.
me, my struggles with my body had a lot to do with, if I finally look a certain way, then I'll be worthy of love. And
Yep.
it was also a barrier to receiving intimacy that until I look that way, then that's why I'm not getting love, or that's why I'm not giving myself permission to love myself. And the alcohol was a lot about, well, I need to have this barrier between me and you so I can
Mhm.
actually be present because otherwise I can't be present. And with a lot of the manipulative relationships, it was like, well, if I'm pulling the strings, then you can't fully hurt me.
Yeah. Exactly. And is the opposite, then you let your body go or you overeat and
Mm.
all that, then it's a barrier between you and intimacy. It's all a barrier between you and intimacy.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And the biggest barrier between you and intimacy is intimacy with the self,
Yes,
as I
100%.
mentioned
And that's
before.
what the book's about. I mean, that's what I wrote it to show the transition for a year of recovery in sex and love addiction, the 12-step program,
Yeah.
to then get to the root of it, in chapter 11 and 12. It's like you live and die with yourself. If you don't love yourself, then what's the point of this life anyway? So I really try to go through the book, like giving rules and things you can do and how I
Mm.
got my recovery, not in a 12-step way, but there is 12-step in it. And I tried to make the
Sure.
book not like Bible bum, the
Big book
A big
thumping.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's important to me because that's how I got my recovery,
Of course. Yeah. It's your foundation. And there's a lot
Mhm.
of great wisdom in it. Can you give any sneak previews of some of those self-love tools you're going to be sharing with us?
Yeah, I mean, the self whole thing at the end is this, if it's like you live and die with yourself. That was a
Mm.
big rule for me. You live and die with yourself. So why wouldn't you love yourself first? And some people look at that and are like, you're so selfish. I mean, I just posted about that on Instagram and some guy came at me saying you are the most selfish individual. And I was like,
Oh.
obviously you don't know me. All I do is give and be of service to other people. But what I'm saying is, if I don't love myself, I can't love anybody else and give. So you have to do that work where you get to the core of really loving yourself. And that's not toxic positivity. And
No.
that's not like going to the gym and getting a massage and doing facials. I'm talking, you dig through your shit. You dig through all the trauma to then get to your goal where no matter what happens on the outside, you are okay on the inside. And I
Yeah.
really, do things like prayer, meditation. I talk about, I'm horrible at meditation. I will admit that.
Mm.
I do a gratitude list every night. I get on a meeting every morning. I get on a meeting every night. I be of service 24/7. Anything I do, whether it's being on set, writing a book, doing a podcast, talking to you,
Mm.
it's to be of service to your listeners. It's to be of service to the people reading the book. It's not about me. I have to take my ego out of it. I have to have
Mm.
humility at all times because my addict mind will
Yeah.
literally make it about myself when it is
Oh, of
not.
course. They'll just blow
you
up.
know?
Yeah.
So it's right sizing myself on a daily basis. It's having boundaries with people is a huge self-love act for me where people don't talk to me a certain way. No one in my
Mm.
life ghosts me anymore. No one in my life doesn't show up for me. I show up for other people. It's not taking abuse from family members. It's
Mm.
doing the work with family members that we're scared to do and being willing to let go of them. I talk about it a lot in the book. My dad and I had a very emotional incestuous relationship, what
Okay.
is meaning where, I acted
Lack of
like his
boundaries.
partner,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it wasn't sexual, but it was like the energy as a child went to him instead of his energy as a parent coming to the child. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
where it
like he
gets really,
needed more from you than perhaps, like it wasn't the give and take was not equal for the roles that you were in.
yes. And
Yeah.
and I think that happens a lot. I think
Mhm.
parents do that a lot. Like for me, I don't do that to my son. I don't ask him to give mom a hug when she's having a bad day. I let him have his feelings. I don't try to fix him. He doesn't try to fix me. So it's doing that work that then finds your self love. And the number one thing I do on a daily basis, other than service to sponsees or speaking and all that, is I go and like give without actually telling anyone. There's
That's
something
awesome.
about that is just, about it, that fills you,
Mm.
that starts to build that muscle. Does that make sense? Because I was so
Absolutely.
selfish before. I was
Yeah,
just
it's like,
like,
"Praise
gimme,
me,
gimme,
praise
gimme,
me,
gimme,
praise
gimme.
me." I can I
Yeah.
can I can still be a little like that, as I'll do, like, a little thing, like, I'll clean the kitchen, I'm like, "Did you notice? Did you notice? Look, look, I
Right?
I wiped the counter, I'm a big girl now."
Totally. My husband and I were talking about that. We'll be like, did you notice I put this, blah, blah? Like, it's like, okay, can we not do that? Like, you don't have to be applauded for every single thing you do. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I know, I still struggle with
Us
that, but
addicts love
yeah.
validation. It's
I
like a
know, I know. Once
heroin
again,
high.
it's like that bucket with the hole in it, it's like,
Yeah.
"And you need to be filled." Um, so, um, another thing that I found, for myself, I'm actually using this podcast in a way, with you as a bit of education for myself because my rehabilitation and treatment was
Mhm.
pretty much for my mental health concerns and my alcoholism. But from the process of writing my own book and sharing it, I realized what a strong role my problems with sex and love played. So um, I often said that when I was struggling in a relationship while I was sober, saying
Mhm.
that this is harder than the
Mhm.
drinking in a
Yep.
way, because the thing is like like a bottle, this isn't liquor obviously, but it doesn't have agency. It can't text me. It can't show up
Yep.
at my door if I say don't. It can't, like I can't make it do. It's just a thing. So I found it harder to not engage with drama with another person because that person was also playing a role in it. I
Yeah.
I
You were
remember.
drinking that person. The person
Yeah.
became your new drink. And that's what I say to people is like the addict pull of a relationship is 10 times more difficult than a chemical addiction to break
Yeah, because even if
sometimes.
you say no, that person might be saying, "But yes."
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
how do you navigate that in recovery? Because in my experience, if I have problems with intimacy, it's not just in my sexual and romantic relationships, it's in
Oh, it's all
general.
every relationship.
So how do you navigate that in a way that I feel like, especially in the environment that you live in, there'd be a lot of people that would be willing to enable that kind of drama, that would be wanting to pull you in. I remember from your book that the scene with your friend that just broke my heart, and like you know, trying to get you to do something that you did not want to do,
Chapter 8.
and alcohol, and you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to give any spoilers to the listeners, but
That was my favorite chapter, the one with
mm,
Cool Girl.
yeah, cool girl
Yeah.
and the married guy there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Superstar. Yeah.
superstar.
Yeah, that was the one of the best chapters to write. I actually loved writing that chapter, but it was a very big test of setting boundaries with people in your life, willing to let go of people. And that's the thing that's the hardest, is breaking those chains. And it takes years and years and years. It is not easy. Sex and love addiction is, they say in AA, it's like the doors are like revolving doors. People come in.
Mm-hmm.
It is 10 times worse. Literally, I started 12 years ago, probably 5% of people are still there.
Oh, wow.
People don't
Mm,
get a lot of time. I'm an old timer with 12 years. I mean, we do
mm.
not average a long span of sobriety in our program. Even to find a female sponsor, I couldn't find a female sponsor.
Okay.
I have a gay man as my sponsor. So it is really hard to break this because, first of all, our society amplifies it, glamorizes it. Every
Mhm.
song you listen to, every
Oh,
movie, it's
yeah.
like unrequited love. Find that person, texting, oh, you have to make him love you. I mean, just turn on their
Vampires.
TV, right?
Yeah, and just this culture of I remember whenever I was watching a show as a
Mhm.
teen or sometimes even now, the only thing I cared about was who the characters ended up with.
Yes,
Like that is the end of the story.
exactly.
And it was usually the characters that I was rooting for were the ones that had the biggest amount of drama and dysfunction between them. It's like they're gonna
And they had
make
to
it.
win
They're
it
gonna
over
make
and they
it.
had to like,
Yeah.
that
Like
whole
gaslight each
thing.
other and like hurt each other. And then
Yeah,
you're
but
like,
then
oh
they
my
don't
God,
go
it's so
past
hot.
that time
Mm.
and show them what, like, oh, and this is how they had a healthy relationship, and this is how they paid the bills and took
Yeah,
out
or
the
this is them
trash
in
and all
20
that stuff.
years miserable, right? You can't
Totally, and that's
sustain that sort of drama for 10, 20
no,
years. It's
mm-mm,
good
and
for TV. But
that's the one thing I tell people I work with, like the clients I work with, and my sponsees and people, is if there is drama in a relationship, this is the number one thing. It's probably not a great relationship. Any
mm,
healthy relationship does not have drama. That's not going to mean you're not going to have conflict and disagreement, but that drama that we get addicted to,
mhm.
that push pull. So that's the number one thing. You have to look at your relationships. And if there's any drama, that's probably a place you need to look at. Maybe clearing out, setting boundaries, getting rid of the person. So it took me a good 7 to 8 years, I kid you not,
Mm.
to clean house.
Okay. Yeah.
It was a long process. It's like peeling that onion, but just keep going deeper and deeper. So the number one thing I would tell people, if there's drama, you have to really look at it, because that's not your relationship. Should be really just this. And that boringness you have to be okay with. There's
Yeah.
a whole letting go of, but my life will be boring. What do you mean I can't flirt? What do you mean I can't intrigue? What do you mean I can't go from relationship to relationship to relationship, or
Or have
one night
all of them at the
stands?
same time.
Exactly. Like, yeah, but that's the thing. It's like that boring is actually healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where the real love
Mhm.
exists.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're just kind of getting high on these kind of traumatic emotions of
Yeah, and
it's like the
falling in
cycle.
love. That is like
Yeah.
the best high in the world.
I remember when I was in rehab and they talked a lot about the cycle of abuse in
Mhm.
relation to addiction. And it's that, there's things are going and then there's something awful happens, but then there's the apology and then the
The
honeymoon
makeup.
phase,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden things just go back to normal and then there's a crash and people just get addicted to that crazy cycle because
Yeah.
they're not even just addicted to the highs, they're addicted to the lows
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's
It's a whole all
part of
part
their
of it.
narrative.
Yeah, because you wanna feel that high, that all of that, but then we also crave that low where we're a piece of shit and we're not
Mhm.
worthy and we need to be treated this way, or
Yeah.
all of the above we get addicted to.
Yeah. So actually about that,
Mhm.
I hear a lot in recovery in general that, when you're sick of suffering, when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, that's when
Mhm.
you come in, when you're sick of the suffering. But I found for myself, particularly in my struggles with love and intimacy, that part of what I was addicted to was the suffering. So
Yep.
it's like you're sick of the suffering, but you also crave the suffering.
Oh my god, I
Mhm.
kid you not, when I was writing the book and I would see things, like music videos or things like that, it made me longing to miss that breakup, that
Yeah.
dramatic breakup when they're both crying in a room and it's, like, so dramatic, and I even went to my husband and I was like, "Man, we're never gonna have that, like, we just don't have that, we're so healthy," and it's like,
Mm.
I still miss that as an addict. Like,
Mm.
I will watch a movie. That's why one of the number one things when you enter the program, you have to watch what you read,
No Moulin
watch what you
Rouge? Like, come on, man.
Moulin Rouge. Oh my god, that movie
I've
triggered
seen
the
that movie
crap out of
about
me.
200 times. I'm like, I
Yes,
wanna
my
die
mom
like
was
that.
watching
I
Dirty
wanna die
Dancing.
like that.
I know. But here's the thing, like, she was a prostitute and
Mm.
was, like, dating an old dude to, like, get money from him, and then
Mm.
she was this unrequited love, but she was dying. It's so depressing that you and I would watch it and go, "Oh, that's the
Oh, that's
life
true
I
love.
want."
Well, at least they got to sing about it.
But here's the thing, there was a lot of movies I couldn't watch. There was love songs I couldn't listen to. There was books I couldn't read. You have to wipe out a lot of all that stuff that society thinks is healthy.
Romantic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then bring it back in a healthy way, but still to this day, I don't watch Moulin Rouge, I don't watch The Notebook. In the book I write about The Notebook is the number one movie no one is allowed to watch in SLAW. Like, nobody watches it, it's so triggering,
I'm pretty sure
and it's
making it
like,
in the rain isn't that hot anyways. It's kinda sticky, your makeup would be running
I know.
everywhere and, like, hmm.
Well, that's why I put it in the I've made out in the rain. I've done those things in my job, and I really broke
I think
down
I got
what
that from your book, actually, that you
yeah,
were saying that it's actually not hot at all.
it's not. It's the most uncomfortable situation. Love scenes are uncomfortable, and that's why I wanted to put the working Hollywood because I'm not a star. I'm not an A-list celebrity. I'm just a working actor,
Mhm.
And I wanted to say, this is what being a working actor looks like. This is what, Jennifer Lopez doesn't go through, but this is what the average Joe in Hollywood goes through. And I wanted to show people the reality of the
Mm.
business
Yeah.
and what it really looks like. And also like de destigmatizing what movies are not real.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
important to me in the book too, to like help people see that side as well.
Yeah, because there's this idea that someone else's life is so much more glamorous than mine.
Mm-mm.
Somebody else is having the best time. And also the idea of access, I think, too, that, if you are in a position like you are, where you're in in an industry where there's a lot of good-looking people messing around with each other,
Yep, yep.
that you almost have just kind of like unlimited access to acting out in that
Yeah.
way.
Mhm.
Right? It would be like an alcoholic who insists
Hanging out
on
the
working at a
bar.
bar. Yeah.
Exactly. But here's
Yeah.
the thing, go to any office, go to any restaurant. They're all
Mm.
fucking each other, in the
Yeah.
office they are too. So really Hollywood is no different than any other industry.
Mm.
But we just glamorize it more and it looks prettier because there's
Yeah.
the money behind it. There's the filters behind it. There's the designer clothes behind it. But
Yeah.
really, you walk into a room of slaw, and I really tried to make this apparent in the book is chapter 3 is like you walk in and it's a janitor, it's a school teacher, it's a stay-at-home mom, it's a CEO, it's one A-list celebrity, it's a producer, it's a director,
Yeah.
and we're all the same and we're all suffering. And the outside it might look prettier, but
Mhm.
when your outside looks pretty and
It's
it
harder to
doesn't
notice
match
that
your
the in
inside,
it's
it's
yeah, but it's harder to
worse.
notice that the inside isn't pretty
Yes.
when you're keeping up appearances,
Yeah.
right?
Did you like that scene with the guy shooting heroin on the street and Roxanne running next behind? Did you
I
remember that?
I did, and saying that the sort of difference between you is that, your addiction is on the inside, no one can see it, whereas,
Yeah.
for
And
that
he was living his pain and
on the
heartache on the
outside.
outside, and he
Yeah.
was using a needle and I was using a guy's,
Mhm.
that was just a moment for me where I was like, I am no different than the guy living on the street shooting heroin.
Yeah, it's just a more socially acceptable or
Mhm.
even socially sanctioned kind of addiction, because it means you're exciting. It means you're interesting.
Desirable.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
exactly.
I think I just mentioned J-Lo. I think she's been married 4 times. Elizabeth
Mm,
Taylor's been married 6 times. Marilyn Monroe. These are people that suffer from this addiction that don't
yeah.
realize they're suffering, and they
And,
keep thinking if they get married, they will get fixed, and it ain't gonna happen.
and I even look at those poor people who have been on like 5 seasons of The Bachelor and Bachelor in
Oh,
Paradise and stuff like that. And I used to watch it and make fun of them, but now I watch it and I'm just like, oh, you poor thing.
yes. I can't even
Like you
watch
poor
it.
thing. It's like you just really want love and you just don't understand what love is.
No, and they're all making out with each other and not
Yeah,
like it's
and just
just so depressing. I've never actually even seen The Bachelor or any of that. I can't watch
mm,
any of those kind of shows because it's just for me, it's all about fantasy, looking outside of yourself, romance, that unavailable person, and then competing with each other. Like
yeah, I know
it
it's
makes me sick.
yeah, it makes me sick, but I can't look away. It's kind of like a car wreck for me. But it's actually one of those things where now in my kind of settled, boring relationship, as it's been for at least the last year, I watch that sort of thing and I'm like, oh, thank God. Like that's not
Yes.
me. That I'm not in this place of desperation that I think if I go skydiving with some guy who may or may not give me a rose if I say the right thing, then that's real love. At least I'm not in a place where I believe that.
Yes. Yes, I can agree, but I get that. I literally deal with those people on a daily basis, so I don't need to watch it on TV. All I could, he doesn't love you. She doesn't
Mm,
love you. Like, let it go.
yeah.
It's so sad, but our society again amplifies it and makes it entertainment, and that we have to put on all this facade to get someone to love us, and it's just not true. It's not true.
No, it's not, and I think it is amplified by the media,
Mhm.
obviously, but I think it's also amplified just by Western civilization and the kind of capitalist structure of like you are never enough.
Yep.
Because capitalism thrives on the idea. I'm not a communist. I'm not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with capitalism, but ingrained in it is the idea that you always have to be wanting, that you always need
Yeah.
the next
If I
thing.
get that car, if I get that purse, if I get that, I will be better. If I get that house, that job, everything, get, strive higher, set your goals more. It's
Yeah.
exhausting.
So we have that same idea when it comes to our relationships that once we get something, then
Mhm.
we're supposed to want the next thing,
Yep.
right? Um,
Exhausting. And
yeah.
for an addict, that's deadly.
hmm And when I was reading your book, it really helped me sort out a couple of things because I always assumed that I couldn't be a sex and love addict because I didn't crave sex
Hmm.
itself.
Hmm.
That like I didn't sit at home at night wondering when I was gonna get that's just never
Yeah,
been my
me either. Never did
process.
that.
I
Never
ac-
done that.
yeah, I've actually for the most part needed to use alcohol to get through, particularly the more self-destructive sexual acts like sleeping around and stuff like that in a self-destructive way.
Yeah.
Like it was never a process that I enjoyed. It was something that I did almost as a way of establishing power, but
Hmm.
also a
Power and
way
control.
of punishing myself, like throwing my
Hmm.
body around like it was useless. So I never liked it.
Yeah. I mean,
Unless it
that's
was actually like with an intimate partner. But even then, it took me a really long time to figure out how to even do that without alcohol because I was so uncomfortable with myself. So, do you get that a lot when newcomers come in that are confused that maybe because they don't feel like they're sexual enough?
Yeah, I mean, I win the book. Roxanne and myself, we don't have a lot of sexual partners. I've never had a one night stand. I actually have never in before this book, like had an orgasm sexually.
Oh
Like
wow.
that's not my thing. I'm a sex and love addict because I use sex as a currency. I
Mm-hmm.
use sex to get whatever I wanted. I used my sexuality to manipulate and control others. It was
Mm-hmm.
never about the sexual acting out and
Yeah.
the getting off.
Yeah.
That was just a tool. So
Mm.
you can be a sex addict and a sex and love addict and be married to a man, and you use your manipulation and sexuality to get what you want. You're
Yeah.
using it as a currency. There's an exchange. So yeah, it's very difficult when newcomers come in and they just cannot say, I'm a sex and love addict. They'll say, I'm a love addict. I'm a love avoidant. I'm a
Yeah.
fantasy addict, but they will like, against the sex, because I think also our culture has looked at sex addicts as just men cheating
Yeah.
on their wives, going to
Mhm.
rehab as an excuse, and then going and doing it again. And it's so much bigger than that,
There's
because
a
it's using masturbation. You can be a
mm,
sex addict
and
and
only
only masturbate and look at
yeah.
porn
There was
and
there
look at
yeah. I
porn.
knew a guy who was in rehab once for just porn, just
Yeah,
porn.
just
He
porn.
did
Yeah,
yeah.
because he's acting
It wasn't
inwards.
just porn because like he didn't leave his house, poor guy.
No, I know. Oh,
No?
I
Like,
know a
yeah.
lot of those. Don't
Yeah.
don't you worry.
And
But that's
especially
the
for
thing.
women too. I
Mhm.
feel like that's a huge double standard too, not in sex and love, but also in for alcoholics. There's like the alcoholic woman is sloppy. She can't handle her liquor. It's like, oh, look
Yep.
at her making a fool of herself. And a woman who has a problem with sexuality, well, she's a slut
Well, yeah,
or
I still hear that. I still hear when people like hear about my book, they're like, "Oh, you just used your looks. You were just a or whore." And I was like, "You don't know the story at all. That is not true.
yeah.
And you can call me what you want and name it what you want, but that's not the truth. I was broken inside, and I was
Mhm.
using my sexuality to get power in my life because I
Yeah.
felt so powerless.
Mhm.
Call it what you want."
I feel like a lot of those labels can make it a lot harder for women to get help for these
Yeah,
types
that's
of
why I
things
spoke out. I
because like for myself, I never really received help for that particular thing because, well, once again, my life was full-time recovery anyways,
yeah.
and I didn't want to have my fingers in too many pies. But at the same time, it was also that I didn't want the stigma associated with that
Oh,
one.
yeah.
I didn't mind the stigma associated with being a drunk, but for some reason, like, I don't think I'm like them. Like
Yeah.
that was what was going through my head. I'm like, it's like, I can keep it in my pants. I don't think I'm like them. I'm just like, I'm just crazily manipulative and I've sabotaged every single relationship I've ever been in because, but
But that's
yeah.
the thing. That's the stigma I'm trying to break. You saying
Yeah.
that right there is what I'm trying to break.
Yeah.
That after I got my 10 years of recovery and wrote that article for HuffPost saying, here, this is what a sex and love addict looks like. Here's what a woman looks like in recovery. Using your sexuality to get that love. And that is a sex and love addict. And I was sick of people saying they didn't want to be labeled one, especially as a woman. So that's why
Mhm.
I spoke out. But here's the thing. And I love that you said that because recently we just had somebody come in with 30 years in AA and was
Mm.
like, I have been dodging this room like the plague.
Uh,
Like, I have not wanted to walk into this room because it is the last line. It's the
mm.
last line of defense. Because here's the thing, before you were a drunk, you were probably addicted to your parents or a relationship
Mhm. Yeah.
in your youth. You probably had trauma. You probably have things you haven't looked at. You probably, use your own sexuality not to have your feelings. So it's like the last line of defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen so many people that I know personally in recovery and in the mirror just completely complicate their recovery because the moment they put down the drugs or the alcohol, all of a
Mhm.
sudden it
They-
was
A
grass. And
person.
I did that my entire recovery.
Yeah,
Like
you
I went
said that.
yeah, I've done it more times than I can count. I would kind of orchestrate interpersonal drama that would enable me to relapse, but even in my current one, I did it so many times. It's just we managed to kind of work it out eventually.
Yeah.
But it if I had been single when I got sober this time, I don't even know if I would still be single. I mean, still be sober because the cavern of self-sabotage possibilities. So I feel like I knew on some level, well, I did know that I had a problem
Mhm.
with this sort of thing because I told myself when I went to recovery, you're not going to talk to the men at the AA meetings.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get their phone numbers. You're not going to talk to them one-on-one. If they try to like, take you into a corner and be like, hey, baby, want to talk about your
13
steps?
step you?
Yeah. Or even like, because I knew the problem was me. I knew the problem
Yeah.
was me.
Yeah. And your energy was probably even saying, come and entice me.
It
Just so
wasn't,
like
but I knew that if like
but you
someone,
were though. Here's the thing. When you don't
Hmm,
do this work, you put
yeah.
that energy out even when you're not
It's
wanting
true
to.
because actually I remember in the first couple of months of AA meetings, I always made sure my makeup was perfect and I always made sure that I looked cute and I would go in and I
Mhm.
would be like, "Hi," um, and
No,
I
but
didn't.
that's the thing
Yeah,
that you're doing it without your, and that's what
yeah,
I had to look at. Like I had to get rid of all my guy friends. I didn't have any men I talked, text, or emailed. I
yeah,
couldn't even go into a restaurant and look a waiter in the eyes because
yeah,
I would give off that flirtatious energy when I didn't even mean to, because I've been doing it for so long. So you have to get rid of all of those things where you use your sexuality, your looks, your flirtation to then actually hold that energy yourself, because you still walk into this world giving off this energy like, give me your attention, validation, complete me, make me feel good. And I kid you not, 12 years, no one's asked me out ever. No
mm,
one flirts with me. I can walk in any room and no one tries to hit on me because I don't give that
yeah.
energy
Because
out
you're not putting
anymore.
that out there. Yeah, and
No.
because it was important for me not to do that because I wanted to protect the relationship I was in and not sabotage it and sabotage my sobriety because I knew the two were linked. I knew if I
Yes.
started acting out in one way, I would start acting out in the other way.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's usually for a lot of alcoholics. Underneath is that they're tied together.
yeah, so tied together,
Mm-hmm.
so tied together. I remember I really enjoy Johann Hari's work, and he has a book called Lost Connections, and about how addiction, in many ways, is a fundamental loss of connection
Yep.
between having meaningful relationships and also having meaningful relationships in terms of a role in your community or just a sense of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I would try to get sober, but then my ways of getting connection were so corrupted and my
Mm-hmm.
ability to connect was so corrupted, then the kind of antidote to my addiction was also an addiction.
Yeah.
You know?
That's why I had to do all that cleaning house. That's why I had to
Mm,
get rid of all those behaviors and connect in a way that was literally me just giving in a
mm,
healthy way, which I write about in the book. I never told anybody until this book the things I would do, but going to be of service to an old folks home at the early mornings and packing their groceries and nobody knowing I was down there, go feeding the homeless on the streets in Los Angeles. And I was doing it to get rid of that. It was always about me, and it was connecting to other human beings in need that were also suffering. There's
yeah.
something about going to do that act of service is what broke that neediness from other people.
Because it was doing something without the expectation and without the
Mhm.
strings and without the,
What
yeah.
am I going
'Cause-
to get back? Give me
yeah.
mine.
'Cause once again,
What's in
I
it for me?
Yeah, because once again, I feel like it extends to far more than just romantic relationships. And I really enjoyed in the book some of your origin stories from your adolescence.
Oh,
Um,
brutal. Those were brutal to
yeah,
write, just so
but
you know.
because I always I had a similar sort of like drama where I was when I was 14, where
Mhm.
there was this guy and me and my best friend, he was sort of going between us, and it
Mhm.
was a whole piles of drama and chaos and
Love
betrayal.
triangle. Ugh.
Yeah, terrible love triangle. And I always thought that I was the victim, even though I was orchestrating a lot of it. And I was, and when you talked about chasing the high of
Mhm.
like the power that you had over this boy, um, it just made me realize like, oh my God, this drama of this relationship that I was in when I was 14 years old.
Yep.
Every other time I've gotten into a relationship since and it didn't have that drama, I
Mhm.
would be like, well, this isn't right. Like this,
Totally.
like, why aren't we breaking up and getting back together and writing each other love letters and writing each other hate letters and threatening to kill ourselves? And like
Exactly.
that's what I expected. Like every relationship should be like that every second.
Yeah. And writing those chapters was the worst. I mean, when I
Mm,
wrote chapter 5, 6, and 7, those were the moments, especially during the rewrite, where I just wanted to like throw the book on the wall and be like,
mm,
F this, because even though I've done the work and looking at the character defects, looking back at the why, walking through the fire, letting it all burn, compare and despair, all that stuff that I talk about in those chapters, and really doing the work and looking back, it's like torture sometimes, but then I got to go to a deeper level of understanding every time I rewrote it. So I am very proud of those chapters, but I definitely hated
I'm
those
sure it was hard to
chapters.
read, but it really helped me process that, those early formative relationships, they really
Are so
do
important.
set a
Yeah.
precedent to how you relate to other human beings and what
Mhm.
you expect and what you're willing to do to other people too. And yeah, it was powerful for me in that way because I
Oh,
always
that
thought,
just made it all worth it. You just
"Mm,
saying that. So thank you.
mm." As it got to a point where I just was kind of blowing it off, but then I realized how mirrored and like
Mhm.
how I have been trying to recreate that relationship in so many of my grown-up relationships. And it's not
Yeah.
really appropriate to be trying to create a 14-year-old love triangle when you're 30.
Right.
It's like, did
That's
not.
not going to end well. That's not going to end
Did
well,
not. It did
people.
not. And it did not. None of the times, because
Yeah.
none of the times did it end well. Oh, and you brought back to compare and despair too. That
Mhm.
was featured in your book a lot, and I find that to be an interesting component that I struggle with sometimes in recovery
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot. Like actually, directly related to my recovery. Like
Mhm.
I'll
Mhm.
compare. Maybe I'm not as spiritual as that person, or maybe like my understanding of you know a higher power is not as good as that person's because I don't have God on speed dial, and like
Yep.
um
And people quoting the book, and you're like, I
yeah,
don't know those quotes.
I'm
I
pretty good
can't
with the
say it.
quotes, and but
I'm
like,
not, but for me, that's like my dyslexia. I can't
mm,
remember the quotes well, even though, so I'll be like, what's that quote? What's that quote? But it's like, yeah. Or for me, a big one was when I started working the steps. I worked the steps through the AA Big Book. I didn't do
mhm.
it through the Slaw book. I used both of them. And I did the Herb K program, which is intense. But when I was doing that, everybody was speeding through their steps. And I took 2.5 years on my fourth step. My fourth
Mm.
step was 276 people on it. Like
Congratulations.
oh man, I had multiple resentments. I was a carrier of all resentments. And then it took me months and months to read my fifth step. So when people came in after me and were already through their 12 steps, I would get so upset and compare my recovery to theirs. And it's like,
Mhm.
lady, stay in your own lane. That's their journey. It's no better, no worse. Stay in your own lane. Do not worry about what other people are doing. And still to this day, I can do that.
Yeah, it's hard not to bring the ego into recovery in a weird way
Mm-hmm.
though, because it fights back for power all the time.
All the time. It's just
So,
doing those push-ups, right? Those
yeah,
push-ups in the corner.
because in the way that problems with relationships manifest as also a problem with your relationship with yourself, the need for validation and all that. It's like, okay, well, it's not against the rules if I'm getting validation in this way.
Mhm.
And like, notice, like, almost watching myself in these meetings and like patting myself on the back, being like, oh, I said something smart.
Oh, when I got my
And
tenure chip, I was like, oh,
yeah.
good job. Good job. But it's like, no,
Yeah, and thinking of
stop.
yeah, and thinking about what other people were thinking about me, quite a bit. So I think I've gotten a little better at that. But then for me, this podcast is a lot to do with service. But then I
Mhm.
realize that sometimes my ego gets tied up with that too.
Oh
So
yeah. Can't look at the reviews, can't look at the likes, can't look at the numbers. And I don't look at any of our numbers or anything for Secret Life podcast. I just
oh,
can't do it
good.
because my ego is then obsessed with that instead of, oh, did I change one person's life today? Because that's all that
Exactly.
matters. If
Yeah.
I help one person not feel alone and not do something that was going to self-sabotage or hurt somebody else, that's all that matters. But it's so easy for me too to be like, wait, where's my validation? When I speak at meetings or when I speak anywhere in recovery centers, I have to literally go and say, this is not about me.
Me too.
You tell me what to say. And when people say, oh, thank you so much for sharing, I don't actually take it as me anymore. I'm just like, you're welcome. Like, that's why I'm here. I'm just being of service. It's not about me. Like, the book is not about me. When I wrote the book and put it out, it's like, that's not mine anymore. It belongs to
Mhm.
other people. It's not mine.
Yeah. Well, I do think it'll do a lot of work in helping people.
I hope so.
Yeah, and just touching on things that I'm sure a lot of people, not even those with our particular affliction. I took the test actually. I didn't get a stunning 38, but I got a solid 30 on 40 for that. But even people who are not in that particular category,
Hmm.
there's just a lot of good lessons to learn there. Um, just about how you can be less miserable in your own life, the compare and
Yeah, how you can
despair
have better
aspect too.
connections and healthy relationships and love
Yeah,
yourself. And
and
if you
and
get 5 yeses, just so you know, on that quiz, you might have this
yeah, I
problem.
I
So
remember that. So yeah, just
welcome to the club, I can
thank
say.
you, thank you. But it seems like a lot of my issues there kind of sorted themselves out a little bit just
Hmm.
by virtue of working a lot of things in AA,
Hmm.
and just a lot of push and pull within my own relationship and that person working on themselves and everything, and it just kind of happened to work, but it could have not, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just kind of thank my lucky stars that my
You didn't
issues.
have to walk into slaw.
I mean, maybe I still will if I feel like
Who
mixing it up at some
knows? You
point,
never
but
know. I mean, never say never. We all have
yeah.
more work to do. I mean, like I said, people with years and years of recovery and sex and love addict, and AA come in, and it's like
Mhm.
you do what you do in front of you and all will be
Yeah.
revealed.
Yeah, it's more just that I thank my lucky stars that the the situation in which I was going to like completely bulldoze my alcohol recovery, like
Mhm.
those things weren't in place when I got sober, like I so that was good.
Yay.
Yeah. Um I also wanted to touch just briefly, I want to be respectful of your time here on the role of social media in
Hmm.
terms of, I would imagine that would be a highly triggering
Hmm.
kind of
Very
place
triggering.
to be
Yes.
for a problem with requiring validation and comparing yourself to other people and having and wanting to project a fantasy of yourself and having fantasies about other people because everyone is projecting their fantasy life.
Yep.
So how do you navigate that?
Very slowly.
Hmm.
For a year and a half, I was off social media completely. I just canceled all my accounts and everything. But I try to look at it now where I try to be as authentic as I can on a daily basis. I don't put anything over sexual. Not that I think it's wrong to do, it's just not right for me.
Mm-hmm.
I turn off all my likes. I try not to see who's new followers. So I'm very delicate. I have a certain amount of time when I go on and a certain amount of time when I get off. And if I don't do that, I will get on a spiral and completely addicted to it and just be
Mm-hmm.
like, refresh, refresh. Oh, did this thing come through? Am I going to do this? And it's just like, it's still such a delicate. And I don't scroll. I don't go to other people's accounts. I don't look at the TikToks when I do my TikToks. I just can't do it. It's
Yeah.
just, I will spiral in a matter of an hour. I could be
Yeah.
having the best day ever. And I write about this in the book. And if I see something that I think will make me happy, which I know in
Hmm.
my recovery mind that it will never make me happy, but my addict will say, oh, you need that. And look, you didn't get it. And it's not fair. And God's not taking care of you. And I will be down in the rabbit hole, like
Mm-hmm.
eating myself, wanting to shop, whack-a-mole to other things. And
Mm-hmm.
then I have to stop myself and go, is this real? Does this matter? Is this going to be on my tombstone? How many likes I
Uh-huh.
get
Oh God.
on
Yeah.
Instagram? How many followers? How many TikTok views? Like, no, that will
Mm.
never, ever give me my worth. And it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
So I just have to have that conversation with myself a lot if I feel myself going into that place. So it's that
That's
one's,
great. I think
yeah,
it's useful because what you're saying is basically you're setting boundaries with your
yep.
relationship with social media.
Yep. If
Yeah,
I
okay.
don't, it's like another addiction. It turns in, it's my love and fantasy addiction just amplifies. Yeah.
Yeah. 'Cause I think it's difficult when a lot of people are having these, especially over COVID, a lot of people having these mediated, not kind of relationships over social media
Mhm.
and thinking that it's real. And
Oh, yeah. That's the number one thing I have to work with my clients about is like any texting, social media, DMs, online dating. It's not real. You actually don't know the person. There's no intimacy there. There's no, even you and I talking, it's different if we're in person. That's like
Yeah.
true intimacy.
Mhm.
This, yes, is as close as we can get on with COVID safe, but
Yeah,
like
and me
it is
being
different.
on
It
in
doesn't
Canada.
mean anything. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, as I said, I do want to be respectful of your time here, but I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about your podcast and the kind of things that people talk about and what you're trying to do with that. We talked a little at the beginning, but I want to hear a bit more about it.
Yeah. So the podcast came right after the book. When I
Mhm.
put out the book, there was this moment where it was like, oh my God, I don't have stigma or shame anymore. I don't have any more secrets. I'm not carrying, even though everybody in my life knew I was a sex and love addict, I would still go on set and no one would know. No one, that's a part, especially when you're at the beginning of your recovery, you keep close to your chest to protect it. So when I finally came out and said I was a sex and love addict, it was like that last bit of just stigma and shame left. And
Mm.
I woke up at 3 a.m. and was like, Secret Life podcast, giving other people a chance to let go of their secrets and shame. So what I do, I bought a $40 mic. I interviewed a couple friends, changed their names. A lot of our guests are anonymous. And it was off to the races. And the first
Mm.
anonymous interview I did was this girl named Kristen that she shot herself in the chest with a shotgun in her car because
Oh.
she couldn't reach perfectionism. And she walks me
Oh.
through that whole process after shooting herself, why she did it. And it was like chill bumps. And it was like, this is the reason I'm doing this. And it's been one after the other of people. We've recorded over 150 episodes. We've released 88 episodes so far. And it's just like every secret from all walks of life, all ethnicities, all race, all ages. And it's people coming, like I said, 80% of them are I changed their names and saying their truth and secrets
Mm.
from the past or secrets in the present they're still in. And it's like, being molested by your OBGYN right after you gave birth,
Mm.
using abortion as birth control, stealing food from Whole Foods because you hate Jeff Bezos. Like there's funny ones. It goes from really, really dark. We try to go dark, light, dark, light.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like
And
when I
it's,
make a mix CD, I would put like a really dramatic song and then hey,
no,
let's dance
no, there's a
song.
lot of funny ones where you lie in your resume and then you get hired for that job and you have to go do it and you make an ass out of yourself.
Mm.
There's ones where you slept with your stalker and didn't tell everybody, and then still like said he was a stalker. There's funny ones, coming out stories that like cracked me up. But then there's really heartfelt ones where it's like when going to a sale asylum after a breakup and wanting to commit suicide. And we just did a funny hating online dating one that's out now. So it's all walks of life, all
Mm.
men, women, trans. We have everybody on it. And I'm so proud of it because it's my husband and I do it together. We don't do it for money. We do it for the act of being of service to the world.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I'm going to cry. I have to tell you the love that we are getting back. Like thank you so much. I'm body dysmorphia with men, things that people don't talk about. And it's one of the best things I've ever done other than having my son in my recovery. But yeah, I'm really proud of Secret Life podcast and we've worked really hard on it. And it's something that him and I both, we're just extremely, extremely excited every Monday it comes out. Like we just know like Mondays is like, okay, who are we going to help this week? Like it's that for us.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah,
amazing. I'll definitely be
yeah,
giving that a listen.
please.
And I'm going to link to that in my show notes because it sounds really, really interesting. I was busy reading your book, so I didn't get around to it yet,
You'll
but
love it.
I'm
You'll
sure
love
I
it. I
will.
promise.
I'm sure I will. As long as it's not true crime, I'm happy. But actually, the
It's not.
shoplifting from Whole Foods, does that count as true crime? I don't know.
Could be, yeah. And there's one like a shopaholic one. And so there's some crimey like ones, I guess.
Yeah, but that's fantastic. And you really are doing a service because there are a lot of people who may not fit neatly into a category of, for myself, like alcoholic, sex and love addict,
Mhm.
CA, like they may not feel like they belong in any of those rooms, but they still have a story to tell and they still
Yeah.
need a place to tell it where they feel safe. And you're offering that to people. So That's
Thank
amazing.
you.
I think you're doing
Yeah, it's
amazing
one of the
work.
best things. And it's not even about me or the guest, it's about the listener. That's what it
Mm.
is. It's like the people that don't have the voice. So the guests
Yeah,
get to call the shots. The guests, I've had 4 guests say, "Can you not release my episode?" And I've trashed them.
good.
It's never Mark's or my call. It's what the guest wants to release. So that's
Yeah,
important
but
to
you're doing a
us.
lot of work in the process of normalization. That's a big part
Mhm.
of what I want to do with this podcast, and actually what your book did for me too was sort
Oh,
of normalizing things that I not normalizing in that now they're acceptable, but just being like, "Oh, okay, well, I don't feel alone in this anymore." Like that sort of
oh,
feeling that people get when they have their first identification at a meeting. And I feel like you're probably offering that to people who might think that they're the only one who had that experience, or that they're
yeah.
the only one who feels this or thought that or did that. So, you know, us alkies, for me, there's millions of people who I can walk into a room and they're like, "Oh yeah, I got that." But there's a lot of people that I'm sure have come onto your podcast that really do feel alone and really
Yeah.
did feel, and a lot of people who are listening that are like, "Oh my goodness." Like, I never
Yeah.
thought anyone else had done that. So I think that's really amazing. I'm really
Thank
excited
you.
to listen to it now.
Yay.
And finally, before you sign up, we sign off. This My podcast is generally geared towards people in recovery or those who struggle with addiction in one form or another, or anybody. But since I learned so much more about my own identification as in terms of my problem as someone who definitely qualifies for SLAW,
Mhm.
what would you say? What advice would you give to someone who may be doing well in their recovery in one area, but might suspect they have a problem
So the
in
first
in
thing
the
is,
SLAW category?
yeah, the first thing is don't have any judgments on it,
Hmm.
because what you think the room is like is not what the room is like. It's pretty
Yeah.
much, I would rather hang out in a slaw room of a bunch of sex and love addicts than any other room in the world.
That's
It's the
amazing.
safest place. There's no judgment. You could say every horrible thing you've ever done in relationship and nobody will judge you because we've all been there. So
So it's not like that Chuck Palahniuk book where you go to a sex
no,
addicts meeting and everyone's just hooking up in the bathrooms
no,
and trying to
no.
getting all rapey.
No, and even I'm not in AA, but I've heard some really gnarly stories in 13 stepping. You are
Mm,
not allowed to do that in SLAW. The rules are very, very strict to be in the rooms. So it is the safest place. And then the second thing I would say is like, do you want to keep acting out the patterns of your relationships the rest of your life? And if the answer is no, go online like you did and do the
mm,
40 self-diagnosed questionnaire. It's really quick, yes or no questions. And if you get 5 yeses, this might be a room for you, because I have to tell you, if you knew me 12 years ago, I am nothing like the person I was. I I'm happy in my life. I have serenity and peace more than ever. All my relationships show up for me and I show up for them. I don't get high off people anymore. No one completes me. If my husband left me today and my son, God, I would be devastated with both, but I
mm.
would be
But
okay.
you'd
And the work
survive.
yeah, and the work I did in SLAW, no one can take from me. This inner work that is mine, that's going to the grave with me. And I think, the best thing I can say is there is hope and there is change and it's possible. So just because you've gotten through your alcoholism, drugs, food, money, whatever it is, this might be a place you need to look. Just like sometimes we have to go to Al-Anon, sometimes we have to go to
Yeah.
SLAW.
Overeaters Anonymous, gambling,
Yeah,
whatever
everything.
pops
Yeah.
up, right? That
Right.
whack-a-mole game is a bitch.
It is a bitch. And here's the thing, you're not sober if you're whack-a-mole into something else,
Mm,
because a sober mind is our thinking. And a lot of slaw is your thinking is the
hmm.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So please come into the rooms. They saved my life. They can save yours too.
Okay, well, I'm also going to post some online resources to that in the
Yes,
show
please.
notes, as well as a link to your podcast and a link to your book. And I really hope everyone checks them out. So, Brianne Davis, it was so wonderful having you on the show for my first ever interview.
I know. I love it. It made me so
Yeah,
happy. Thank you for having
you
me.
popped my host cherry, so
Yeah.
that's
Slaw little reference.
oh, that was an unintentional pun,
I know.
but
I love it.
and yeah, I hope we talk again in the future. And thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me. Bye, you guys.
Bye.